Thanks very much. Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I hope all your connections, electronic connections, are working well. You know, an important part of the BIRCWH program is not only formal mentoring, but also informal mentoring. And a component of that is learning from our peers and former BIRCWH scholars. And so we have designed the program today for you to gain some insight from the successes of some of the other BIRCWH scholars that have come through the various programs. And we've selected these individuals because they represent different expertise in fields of research, and we'll provide some insight as how to really leverage your BIRCWH program to maximize your ability to succeed, not only in obtaining extramural grant support or internal grant support or creative grant support, but also in developing leadership skills that will allow you to enhance your career going forward, because after all, you really are the leaders of the future in terms of women's health and sex and gender-based medicine. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Nathan Schilaty, who is one of the BIRCWH scholars here at Mayo. He's currently in the program. He comes from a very interesting background of a doctor of chiropractic medicine. He went on to obtain a PhD, and he's now in a postdoctoral fellowship. So he's interested in not only whole body mechanics, but also rehabilitation activities. And he's been very interactive in our program and has become a proponent of sex-based initiatives in sports medicine, which we're very excited about. And I'll let Nathan introduce our other speakers for today. So take it away, Nathan.
Thank you, Virginia, for that introduction. And welcome, everyone. Glad you can join us today. And a special thank you to Brittany and also Dr. O for organizing this event at Emory University. We do appreciate your outreach and support. So to briefly introduce our three panelists today, we have Dr. Monica Gandhi. She is a professor of medicine and associate division chief of the Division of HIV, Infectious Diseases, and Global Medicine at UCSF San Francisco General Hospital. And she also serves as the medical director of the HIV Clinic at SFGH, known as Ward 86. She is co-director for the Center for AIDS Research Mentoring Program and is the chair of the advisory board for the UCSF building, or BIRCWH. We all know that abbreviation, right? And she conducts translational research focused on pre-exposure prophylaxis and treatment strategies for HIV infection in women. Also today we have Dr. Melissa Morrow. She's an associate professor of biomedical engineering in the Division of Healthcare Policy and Research and the Department of Health Science Research at Mayo Clinic. She is a basic science and translational researcher that investigates the causes, treatments, and outcomes of neuromusculoskeletal injury and disability, with a special emphasis on women's health with techniques such as motion analysis, field-based activity monitoring, and imaging. And her research interests include knee osteoarthritis, joint replacement, and shoulder impingement. And finally, Dr. Jerica Berge. She's a tenured associate professor at the University of Minnesota Medical School in the Department of Family Medicine and Community Health. She is a behavioral health clinician and researcher and the co-director of Healthy Eating and Activity Across the Lifespan, known as the HEAL Center, which focuses on the integration across research, clinical practice, community, and policy to address weight-related health disparities, and as well serves as the associate director of the University of Minnesota Citizen Professional Center. So thank you all very much for joining us today, and we are excited to hear about your BIRCWH experience and be able to have an open discussion. So for all those viewing, all the BIRCWH scholars and BIRCWH associated individuals, please feel free to type in questions as this panel begins, and as things come to your mind, we'll make this an open discussion and make it as interesting as possible. So without further ado, I'll start off with some questions, and we'll just let anyone who wants to field that question first just take it. And of course, all three of you are welcome to answer the same question and to add in your individual expertise as well. So if you would, first and foremost, and I'll hand this over to, let's go to Dr. Berge first. If you could just give us a brief overall career experience thus far, and then we'll just pass around the three of you, and then from there we can go into additional detailed questions.
Sure. So you heard a little bit about me already. What I'd like to just start with is that as I look back to where I am now, my Birch experience was between 2008 and 2011, so about 8 years out. I can pinpoint very specific key experiences on the Birch that have launched my career. So as I was leaving the Birch, I had already received an R21 and had an R01 under review. And so going off the Birch, I felt like they had really prepared me and set me up to really go to that next level of continuing to receive NIH funding. So since that, I've been able to attain, mostly my funding is NIH. I've continued to get NIH funding and been able to stay at my goal of 75% research and 25% clinic. So it was able to kind of help me create that structure and then maintain that structure. A key thing was the collaborations on the Birch experience. So with my mentors, as well as my mentoring team that has also built other networks for me. So I was able to become co-investigator on other grants, center grants that were part of NIH consortiums, which then just led to kind of a web of connections that allowed me to keep at this level of funding. I continued to do clinical work, as I said, as a way to keep in the reality of everyday world and really help drive my research. Since then, as well, I didn't do a K award as part of my Birch. As I said, I received an R21, and so everyone's at a different place, but for me, that was the perfect structure for me to then launch into the next level, which was an R01 after that. And then since then, as you heard, I have become tenured, and then I'm going up for full professor this year. And part of now have come back around to be part of the Birch leadership at our university. And then just recently, we have created a position in the medical school for the Center for Women in Medicine and Science. And I just have been appointed as the director of that. And so there's just been a lot of connections that as I look back on so far, these 8 years since Birch, that I would bring back to my experience on the Birch.
That's excellent. Thank you, Jerica. Missy.
Sure. Thanks, Nathan. Some of my experiences are similar to Dr. Berge. I am potentially the most junior alumni as a part of this group. So my experience was from 2011 to 2013. Coming off the Birch, I was a PhD engineering, and I came onto the Birch right after my postdoc. So it was a kind of next step after my postdoc and leading into faculty position at Mayo Clinic. And I didn't have NIH funding as a part of those 2 years beyond the Birch support. I was able to secure some foundation funding, which then, in addition to that and the studies I was able to complete with the Birch support, led into having that preliminary data for next grants. So I actually didn't receive my first independent funding until 2 years after my Birch tenure, but all of that experience drove that, and we all know the cycle of reviews, and we may go into that a little more. But then I was able to secure my own NIH and DoD funding, and that has led through to my career in terms of expanding my engineering practice, not only in my basic biomechanics work, but I'm also now a part of our Center for the Science of Healthcare Delivery. So I integrate more with our clinicians in terms of health services research and improving the clinical services at Mayo, with that keen eye for sex differences, with that keen eye for women's health, and bringing in that perspective when people aren't naturally thinking of it. And I've shared this with many people, but one of the key things for the Birch was, while being a woman, I was very aware of women's health and understanding of sex differences. It wasn't a part and ingrained in my research prior to being on the Birch. So that was a huge impact that then has led to those better connections, better opportunities, and wearing a different leadership hat than I ever expected I would at Mayo.
Thank you, Missy. And Monica.
Hi. Well, thank you. I'm very much the most senior person of this panel in terms of my Birch Award. So I got the Birch many years ago in 2003, and this was the first time that we had a Birch at UCSF. This was as I was coming off my infectious disease fellowship, And I was always interested in women's health, and specifically my field was HIV in women. And I can safely say that the Birch launched me completely on my career in HIV. So from the Birch, it became a bridge to another K23. And then from there, I became an independent investigator, and I view it fondly. I'm still linked to the Birch because there's never been a program that I felt that was so focused on sex differences. And you probably, maybe Ego told you this, but our last major meeting in HIV medicine, we had an entire session on sex differences that sort of brought for the first time to a field that is usually thinking about social justice and usually thinking about stratifying analysis. We're just starting to now force into the questions of how we should be looking at stratified analyses in HIV medicine between men and women. And I think the Birch was formative. I am excited that you're all in the Birch, and I'm happy to answer questions as we go along about how it formed me. I have to say that I do less women's health research, but it's such a substratum of my core that even though now I have to look at some men in my research and even have to treat men in the clinic, which is very different than before, I'm always thinking about from the lens that the Birch gave me about sex differences.
Thank you, Monica. And as everyone can probably tell, there's this, obviously, the interdisciplinary approach to the Birch program and how far-reaching and also how beneficial it seems to be and has been to each of you. So thank you for sharing those experiences. So to start off with, I would just like to ask, what is something you wish you had known or some piece of advice you wished you would have been given in terms of being on the Birch when you started? I'll open that up. Who wants to roll the dice and take it?
Well, I can talk about grants specifically. The one thing that I think that I learned, Birch helped me learn this, but it was something that I didn't know right away. So obviously we have an interdisciplinary focus, and we think about the importance of making our work look novel, right? And for NIH funding, of course, you have to make it look innovative. So one of the things I learned kind of later, again, that I wish maybe I could have known about sooner, was that submitting grants, so this is really specific, okay? Submitting grants to NIH to look across institutes and study sections more than you think. So the one that you're used to submitting to, for instance, since my background is mental health and psychology and that behavioral medicine, I naturally might have gone to more of a mental health institute, but my research, you can easily talk about it as more related to health outcomes and not just mental health outcomes. It's the interdisciplinary or the interplay between the two. And so I've been very successful in getting funding through NHLBI, which would not have been where my mentors probably originally would have sent me. And so I think looking across institutes and study sections as well, your home one isn't always the one that's going to think you're innovative. A lot of my research does mixed methods and ecological momentary assessment. And again, if I would have gone to more of the psych and mental health, that's not so innovative. But in the physical health world, it's actually quite new still with looking at how to measure momentary factors that affect weight-related behaviors. So that's one thing I take home that I think right away, if you start thinking about that, think outside the box, interdisciplinary, it could be a help.
I wanted to mention something about the Birch that the Birch taught me is that now that I'm more senior than the other people in the panel, there is a underrepresentation of women in senior leadership. And that's why the Birch is so incredibly important. And that's why the leadership that you have at Emory and what we have at UCSF is very important. But if you look at the diversity categories at the NIH of what constitutes underrepresented groups in biomedical research, the first criteria is racial and ethnic minorities. The second is disabilities. The third is being from disadvantaged backgrounds. And then in 2015, the NIH added a fourth criteria of women in the associate professor and professor level, meaning if in the AAMC puts out statistics every 2 years, the American College the American Association of Medical Colleges, that shows that women are still underrepresented in senior leadership at universities. So professors, for example, still 22% of full professors are women in the academic medical centers, as compared to, of course, 78% men. And then when we go to division chiefs, department chairs, and deans, we still see that underrepresentation. About 16% of deans around the country are women. So what I would advocate for you as Birch scholars is that though you're junior now and you're not underrepresented in as biomedical researchers, you will get older. And that fourth criterion has still not been taken into account in the NIH review process. It's listed in definitions of diversity at the NIH, but it's not taken into account in any way at study section or by the NIH. It's listed, but they haven't figured out how to incorporate. And I would encourage you as more junior investigators in women's health research ahead to point out that you have as fewer role models than you should in terms of women at senior leadership positions, and to advocate for the NIH to take that seriously, to consider that an underrepresented category. And that's what I learned from the Birch. The Birch put me on a path where I thought about not just issues of women participants being underrepresented in clinical research, but as women investigators and what happens at more senior levels as an underrepresented group.
Thank you, Monica. And Missy, how about you tell us about the particular aspects of your experiences as a Birch scholar that were most helpful in developing your career today?
Absolutely. So a few, I would say this comes under the, there's obviously the grant piece, and then there's the connections piece. The executive committee were incredible, and they were under the direction of Dr. Rebecca Vaughn at the time, and I was on it with Dr. Miller and a group of really leaders at Mayo Clinic. So interacting with them, leaning on them, helping them, having them guide me through my process was incredibly helpful for my career. Also, being open to asking them things I didn't necessarily think I was going to, and they created connections I never thought I would get at Mayo. So really utilizing that was helpful. The NIH-sponsored Birch meeting every fall was incredibly helpful to start understanding the NIH and meeting program officers, and I was able to take advantage of the early career reviewer program through the Center for Scientific Review. And having that K award was really the only reason my study section review officer let me on study section. And that taught me so much about what a grant should look like and what the review process was going to be. So that was, I cannot say enough how valuable that is. And if you have that opportunity to engage with your study section to do that. And then all of our leadership courses, our mentorship training, everything that our local Birch program set up really advanced me as a leader and gave me that confidence, and I didn't necessarily have coming into this. So my grant writing through the process improved dramatically, and my knowledge of study design and all of those factors were, I'd give total credit to the Birch program for kind of leading me through that process and turning me into a solid scientist and writer.
Excellent. So Jerica, you had mentioned a little bit about the role of the Birch in your career advancement. Do you want to discuss a little bit more about that and what key factors were vital for you?
Mm-hmm. Well, so at most schools, I assume this is pretty similar, to go on a tenure track to being to be able to be tenured and go from assistant to associate. There's an equation of X amount of kind of grants, X amount of publications, presentations, etc. Right? Well, so with the Birch, I feel like some of that was related to the connections I made through mentoring, which have been mentioned, and those people that my mentor introduced me to that allowed me to also get on other people's grants. So obviously we're all wanting to have our independent funding, and we need to, and that's part of what we do and how we set ourselves apart from others. But to stay at that 75% level, if that's your goal, you need to be a co-investigator on other grants. It's really hard to really have 3 R01s at the same time, right, to get your percent effort up to that level. And there's other things like administrative roles or things that might buy out some of your time, but a lot of it in research you need to be on studies. And so my mentor, I think my connection there, as she connected me to other people, and she showed me also, and Birch also helped me to figure out how to hone in what are those things that I'm unique, that make me stand out and make me be important and that expert on another grant that people would need me for. So for me, a lot of it comes to my licensure and my clinical work and mental health. And so on these intervention studies where they need people to be able to oversee, in the supervisory category, our interventionists, for instance, or my expertise in mixed methods, I learned how to play myself up with those unique niches. And so that when I was needed on other grants, there's plenty of us to pick from, right? But I have to stand out amongst other colleagues that might be a similar person that could get put on that grant. So I think in the Birch, I learned, like, what are my key expertise that I bring, and why am I unique and special from someone else? Like, it can't just be that I do quantitative analyses. It has to be very specific. What is it that I would bring to a different study? And so I've been able to, I think, learn how to, advertise myself in a way and be able to show why I would be an expert to be on these other people's grants. And so I think that's what has helped me to stay at the level of funding that then allowed me to get, tenure and promoted and now go up for full. I've been able to stay at that level of funding and have multiple publications that are necessary to show that. So for me, I think it's that, like, you figure out who you are and your specialty, how you can also be on other people's funding and why they need to keep you, because it's easy to not write you in on a grant.
Sure. So in relation to that.
Oh yeah, Nathan, I just wanted to add to that because I think a lot of people think there's one way to do science, which is independent grants. And I think what you just said, Jerica, is really incredibly important, that we had the NIAID chief come out here once and say, we really mean it at the NIH when we say team science. And if you could develop that skill set, being a pharmacokinetic analyst or having the behavioral interventional mental health skills, if you could be that person that everyone around the country has to write because it's your lab or what you do is that skill set, that is also another way to do science. And that's what the NIH is trying to encourage in terms of collaboration, team science. It's not always one model where you have to have your own R1s.
Thank you. So in connection to that, we actually got a question from Tufts University. And the question is, how did you determine whether to submit a K versus an R award after the Birch? Can one of you field that question for me?
I mean, I can tell you my experience. So all along, meeting with my mentoring team, I think it's very individual depending on where you're at in your career. But as I was meeting with my team during my Birch Award, it made sense for me to go up for this R21, because what I was doing was a little bit, again, cutting edge, or, R21s are a lot about the risk taking. And so what I was doing made sense for that mechanism. And so they really encouraged me to do that, and then to go straight to an R1. Because in my case, I would look maybe a bit too overqualified for a K. And so your mentoring team can really help you with figuring that piece out. I think it depends on where you're at and what you already have going for you. But that was my situation.
Yeah, and for mine, it was a kind of an experience. Oh, sorry, my office has an automatic light, so I have to move. So anyway, I got to have a lot of experience assisting my lead mentor in writing his R Series grant. So being a part of his, I just had that experience. I had a lot of examples to go off of. I had the preliminary data I needed to jump into that R01. So my first applications were the R01 and a DoD award, actually, that both ended up getting funding, but that was really dependent on the training I had. I had been a part of writing DoD and a part of writing those R Series grants already, so that made the most sense. I was comfortable in that space. And I had that experience on study section as well that gave me a little bit extra education on those grants that I didn't have in the individual K series.
I had an entirely different experience. I was actually very junior when I started on the Birch, and I think that's one advantage of the Birch, that you could be a little more junior than you would be that was necessary for a K-23. And we all know that being on a K-23 and also being on your K-12 is a very wonderful protected time of this 75% that will never come back. And so I was encouraged at the time to definitely go from a Birch to a K, another K award. And also I really wasn't qualified to write an R. I do want to make two comments about that. Though you're theoretically supposed to be on a K award entirely for 5 years, meaning if you're K-12 and you have a K-23, it should add up to 5 years. If they're different institutes, that can change. I mean, I was very lucky, but I was on a K for like 8 years because I had the BIRCWH, which is NICHD mostly supported, and then I had a K-23 through a different institute. I also wanted to make mention that this R21 issue that Jerica mentioned, I think I want to stress that because as you know what happened earlier this year at the NIH, there was this question that senior investigators should be on a point system and maybe we should limit the number of grants that senior investigators get because it could be hampering the chances of junior investigators. There was a big outcry from universities saying, no, don't do this, like we can't have a point system, for the number of grants a senior investigator could get, and that actually was not enacted by the NIH. But what the NIH did do is put out a program called Next Generation Researchers. And what they said, and you can look this up in August, is that we encourage early career investigators. I truly believe that they have a real focus on early career investigators. And that encouragement came in the way of sort of what the way that Jerica had gone, that encouraging people on Ks to get R21s and R03s, to get these smaller grants. They have a higher pay line. They're 28, at least at my institute, they're 26 or 28. They have a higher pay line than R01s. And they do not count against your R, meaning if you're on a K, you can also be the principal investigator in an R21 or an R03. You just can't be a principal investigator in an R01. So I would encourage you to, even during your BIRCWH, think about R21s and R03s, smaller grants. R21s are $275,000 over 2 years. R03s are $100,000 over 1 year. They're more kind of high-risk research. And that gives you not only experience in our grant writing, you're the principal investigator on that award, but it gives you extra money when you get to your R01 to help supplement your R01.
Great advice. Thank you. So let's go back to Monica for this question. What is the biggest obstacle in the early stages of your career, and how did you overcome it?
The biggest obstacle was developing a niche. And I do advise early career investigators that you want to be able to start looking at your publications, even at your stage, and start seeing a theme. So I did have one mentee who was valuing quantity over quality. And he had a lot of papers that were actually case reports, and he had a lot of publications in number, but there was actually nothing thematic. He would say yes to everything and be on a lot of papers, and there wasn't the development of a theme. When you write a K award, your K-23, or when you write your R21, or when you go for that R01, you want to post a bio sketch such that you had a pivotal number, like even a very few, but high impact publications, so that you're almost the only person that can do this. And so this question of saying no to people, you're all talented, you're all on a BIRCWH, you all have skill sets, people are going to ask you to do a lot of things. You want to start being thematic. You want to have a niche. You want to be that person in research that does X skill set, that is the PK modeler, is the hair lady, is the, whatever you are. Like you want to start developing that theme. And so that means, and this was the hardest thing for me early on, was saying no, and learning how to say no, and learning how to not think that I'm letting go of an opportunity by saying no, practicing saying no, using my mentor as an excuse to say no, so that you could start, everything started going along one path. And by the time you got to your R01, your biosketch reflected that you are a committed person to one path.
Great. Jerica, Missy, anything you want to add to that?
I totally agree with that. The one thing I would maybe add is, and I think this is what Monica was also saying, like being selective. Like clearly she didn't say no to everything. She's saying say yes to the things that match what you're doing, and things that are high impact, like the experience on a study section. I did a similar thing, and boy, that is so important. And so if that opportunity comes, I think you say yes. But it's like lots of other grants that are maybe not going to be as important, grant reviews that aren't going to be quite as important for your CV and future tenure, then you say no. And the other thing you learn is that they come back around. They don't go away. They keep coming back.
Yeah, and in terms of the saying no piece to and being more junior, my lead mentor was not a part of the BIRCWH executive committee, and so balancing the requests from both sides, I think, don't be afraid to lean on your mentor in the leadership to help make those decisions almost for you, but then they can answer for it. Because you deserve some protection while you're finding your niche, while you're finding your path. So use it.
No chapters, no reviews. Do as that as you can. It's peer-reviewed publications is what counts. And I totally agree with using the excuse of your mentor, a mentor who was, I could use her excuse, and I got to keep on a path.
Mm-hmm.
So all of us that are on the BIRCWH program, at some point in time, we're going to need to transition to either another K award or another R award, as you guys were discussing. The question is, what is your advice for transitioning to research independence or a R01, and how do you determine when you're ready to submit an R01? Jerica, you want to take that one?
Well, I think a lot of it is kind of how you're building your research and where your science is. And so for me, the R21 was really at the place with this ecological momentary assessment where I was kind of pushing the edge of the science a bit in the weight-related behaviors. And so that mechanism was perfect for what I was doing. And I had collected a little bit of data in order to show that there's a little bit of experience already, because R21 doesn't necessarily require pilot data. But I mean, I was ready for, that's why it fit well, that mechanism. With an R, obviously you need to have more pilot data and you need to have a lot more to show that you can do this experience. To me, it was also the being able to say I was a co-investigator on other grants. I also had this R21 and R03 to be able to say, look, I've been a PI on some smaller mechanisms. Mm-hmm. So you're kind of building the case for the R01. So it's really like, yes, publications, but also leadership on grants, having co-investigator experiences on other grants, and of course balancing who you have on your co-investigator team on your own R01. Clearly that makes a difference to have some more senior people besides just yourself. And I think you just kind of build this case for when you're ready for an R, and that has a lot to do with where your science is and how you're stacking it up and getting it ready for an R. So to me, it's kind of this, it seems as easy it is to say this, it's kind of like this kind of progression that kind of builds, and it kind of feels at a natural place when you're ready for an R. At least for me, that was my experience.
Yeah, I'll just echo the right mix of senior leadership on your co-investigator list, that preliminary data piece, being connected to the right senior investigators who have the resources that you're going to need that you're not necessarily going to have, because that's just, you're going to be defending that as a junior person, you can do this. And I didn't have an R21 before, but I had that a foundation grant that I was PI on. And even as I was PI as a fellow, but even that spoke to the fact that I led my own project, completed it, published on it, and I think that kind of proved out the leadership piece.
Great, thank you.
I would just add to this that there is this issue of you having your early investigator status. So, there is an advantage of being out of residency or being out of fellowship for a certain number of years and sticking with your early investigator status. You get an advantage in your first R01, right? That the pay line is better for you than it is later, and if this is your second R01. So you want to try to, if you can, stay within, write your first R01 within that time period where you're still considered a new investigator. On the other hand, do not feel free to advocate with the NIH if childbearing, if different circumstances have extended your time a little bit in one phase of your career. We need to make more accounts for life, like childbearing and having young children. So that's really important to feel free to write the NIH and extend your status.
So what advice would you give to PhD scientists that are in clinical departments, as there might be some conflict with time or, the responsibilities?
I can answer that. I have a big clinical role in my division now. And I think it's a blessing and a curse to be a PhD in a clinical department. I think there are some major advantages and some major disadvantages. And the disadvantages are in terms of getting funding to support the rest of your salary, which comes more readily to clinicians. The advantage, though, is that you are a PhD researcher and you get to spend, I hope, a lot of your time doing research. And I've found it more and more difficult to balance out activities as they go along, and I'm not able to spend as much time on my research because I've been given a few too many clinical and administrative responsibilities in my division. So you get that protection, but you may not get the extra. And I would say advocate for yourself. You're extremely valuable to the division to be someone who is so productive and have these research grants, and you should get hard money support. You should get extra support to support the rest of your salary. And I hope that you have representation in the Birch that could help you advocate for yourself, because I think you're in a good position, but you're in a hard position too.
So Misty, you have direct experience with that. Can you contribute to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Monica's comments are spot on in terms of finding a path, if possible, to get that hard money support from the clinical department. A part of that is your integration into their clinical practice and making a clinical impact. So that's going to be really important to make strong connections with your clinicians, find those passionate projects that you have a good clinical partner on. One thing that's difficult is if you're junior and you're coming to this clinical department and you want to work with the star clinician, well, they've got a lot of history behind them. They've got really settled collaborations, and sometimes it's a challenge to kind of break into that and really connect with them. But you find a fellow passionate junior clinician, and I found some really great relationships by working more with the junior clinicians to start to those projects. Now when we go for funding, we need those senior people to be co-investigators and be with it on this. But on the day-to-day, finding potentially a junior clinician who has some time to write, which that's really hard to find, but if you can kind of, I don't want to say this in any disrespectful way, but get them while they're early, just like you're early, where you're both passionate and you both need your careers to survive. I think you can make those relationships that then become really important to the department as you are much more integrated than you would be.
And one other thing I would just add, as far as keeping yourself important to everyone in a clinical realm, probably similar to many universities in the medical school, we have different tracks. So you have the clinical scholar track that's not necessarily research, but then you have research and then you have tenure. One thing I've also found to be able to keep connected and have buy-in from my clinical colleagues who don't necessarily do a lot of research, but are interested in research and would like to write, and it's also on their promotion to have some publications, I will ask them to be co-authors on my paper and in an area that has some similar interests to theirs, and it keeps that good feeling of like I'm contributing to them, they're contributing to me, and that just the camaraderie I think helps. So whenever that stage makes sense for you, that's something to keep in mind. And it also looks good for you when you go out for promotion to show that you've published with many of your colleagues in your actual department, to show how you're helping them get publications as well.
Yeah, and I would like to mention that as now a director of a clinic, there are 2 PhD researchers in our division who were pretty, this is actually really based on what Melissa just said, they were pretty distant from the clinical enterprise, though they were doing research. One is doing research on homelessness in women with HIV, and we have a women's clinic, and the other one is doing food insecurity in HIV. Neither one, PhD researchers, integrated themselves into the clinic. So it was harder for us to value them or to give them pieces of funding, like, for example. And now one is extremely integrated into a homeless initiative that we're trying to launch in our clinic. So she doesn't see patients. She's a PhD researcher, but she has a lot to say about her interval cohort and about working with these women. And she's been coming to our clinical meetings, and now we want to give her pieces from our clinical enterprise. It's exactly as Melissa said, because she is informing our research agenda and our evaluation and monitoring plan for this new clinic initiative in ways that we would never have had the skill sets to do. So maybe that sounds like, well, why should I, I'm not a clinician and why should I do that necessarily? But I will say that, we are academic medical centers, you are academic medical researchers, and I think what Melissa said is brilliant. You have to be integrated into the clinical mission of that division. So I could not agree more, and I've seen it. Saw it just play out, and now we're consider her invaluable.
That's excellent. Good to hear, actually.
Yeah.
So I just want to also encourage all BIRCWH scholars, remember that this is your panel, so please feel free to type questions in and we'll address them as well. While we're waiting for those questions, Jerica, can you tell us a little bit about how you incorporated policy into your work, and do you have recommendations for junior scholars that are interested in policy?
Yeah, happy to. So I think all of us, the more you do research, the more you realize you cannot keep yourself from policy. It's kind of this natural connection you need to make. And so early on, I realized that I needed to learn more about that and do more with that. And so I started working with other, again, collaborators that had come from like my mentors on BIRCWH and tried to figure out how I could add that piece to my work. And I started to learn that policy isn't just maybe what we think it is, like you have to pass some legislation. It operates at so many levels. And so some of my smaller early developments into the policy realm was just changing some of our clinical practice around some kind of form. So around weight-related behaviors, for instance, and how we do well child visits, for instance. And that's a policy at our clinic that was informed by my research that we then made some changes around, for instance. And then as that went well, I realized, this is more and more what needs to happen. And so with myself and kind of another colleague that does a little bit of the same research, we decided to form a center that integrates research, clinical practice, community, and policy. And so that most of the work that we do has some element that connects those or integrates those as a way of trying to really advance the science in what we do, and that as we integrate those domains into all of our research, we're more likely to show effective results and sustainable results. And so I think it's just been this natural progress that I more and more incorporated more into it. And now my lens is like, you can't do it without all of those domains. I mean, I say policy because that's what we're talking about, but clearly you can't leave out the community, you can't leave out the clinical practice or the research. They're all so important. And so my research has really moved into that way of integrating those four domains. Integrated care, interdisciplinary research. It's that same idea, and it was just this natural progression. And it was easier than I thought it would be because, again, I take little steps. And so start with adding a bit of policy to your research, not thinking you have to go inform legislatures to change some law.
Thank you. So Misty, can you tell us, do you still interact with BIRCWH scholars, and are you still involved with BIRCWH activities?
I am. I now, Dr. Miller and the executive committee at Mayo Clinic invited me back to be as a part of the executive committee. So now they're integrating some of the alumni back on the leadership committee as, one of the best ways to give advice to current scholars through those committee presentations and assessments. Now I get to be a part of that and use my experience towards helping the next round of scholars. And, when and eventually if I end up mentoring my own scholars or get involved in mentorship teams with other scholars, that's the pathway forward.
So Monica, how has it benefited you to stay engaged with the BIRCWH program?
Yeah, I mean, it benefits me enormously. A mentee of mine at UCSF who must be on this call is a BIRCWH scholar this year and has been for the last couple of years. And I have also kept in touch with BIRCWH through her. I think she has truly benefited from the BIRCWH as well, and she will make the natural progression soon to independent grants. So it is. I feel like I will always be connected to the Birch, even if I'm not actively working with them. I'm very interested in career development in my other role. I have a role where I'm direct mentoring program for AIDS scholars at UCSF. And I think one thing we do very well in medical school and graduate school is train people on research design or how to take care of a patient or how to write up a study. We don't actually train them on what corporations call soft skills. And those soft skills are how to build a team, how to have a crucial conversation, how to choose the person that you're hiring, how to interface, how to network, how to negotiate. These are called soft skills. And I live in California near Silicon Valley, and all these corporations are constantly taking people on retreat and giving them food and teaching them these skill sets. And we don't do that in medical school or graduate school. We think that these ineffable skills will come with time, with experience, but there's actually structure to the art of negotiation, or to the art of how to have a difficult conversation or how to advocate. And so we run a mentoring workshop where monthly we bring in experts and we teach people these skills. And then we have a leadership retreat for that. And I think that's where I feel very connected with the Birch, and Birch has always done a good job. It's part of why Ego started this whole seminar online, that we're these kind of seminars that you're having right now teaches you things that in an hour you may get advice that just isn't put down on paper. And so I think it's incredibly important for us to do career development workshops. And I think that's what the Birch has always been sort of ahead of the game with in terms of career development programs.
Thank you, Monica. So Jerica, can I ask you what shared traits you've seen among the most successful Birch scholars? That's a pretty loaded question there.
Paper on that, right? I guess I would say, so I was a Birch scholar myself and had colleagues, and since then have stayed connected with Birch and now have become a part of the leadership. So I maybe think I feel qualified to give a little bit of advice about this. So I think a lot of it has to do with a lot of the Birch scholars, when they enter, they have some similar traits as far as like passion about the field and science and research, and have already done a little bit to already find their niche. And maybe it's not completely formed, and it might be shaped a bit while you're on Birch, but some of those successful ones I've seen are people who've come in already kind of hitting the ground running, and they're already applying maybe for other grants, right? And the strategy that works is you're applying for multiple things at a time, and one for sure will kind of come your way usually. And I think there are people who are already doing those things. So they're already engaged in trying to become independent researchers. And it's not to say that's the only way, right? There's people who that hasn't really been something that they were interested in, and then they had an aha moment and then they do the Birch. But my experience has been seen more that have already kind of really been activated in that path and have had a jump start already in trying to become an independent researcher. And so they get on Birch and then they can really get launched. They have kind of at least the passion and the zeal and that lined up, and then the structure brings it to them to be able to then launch. I think carrying on after a lot has to do with using their mentoring team. I think the ones I've seen who are really successful have continued to collaborate with their mentors. And I know it used to be thought of as you got to just cut yourself from your mentor. I don't think so as much anymore. We heard Monica talk about team science and collaboration, and Missy speaking a bit about collaboration as well. And I think we see that differently. So people who I have seen be successful have continued with their relationships with their mentors, built it out. So now you're the PI and they're on your grant, or you've done other things with people that they connected you to. So maybe not your main mentor, but a collaborator that came from an introduction with your mentor. So that especially, I think, also shows people who have been successful from my perspective. So a couple things.
Very good response, especially with little time for preparation.
Yeah.
So let's direct this question to Missy, and then the others, please take some time to think about it as well. But are there any suggestions you would give back to NIH staff for improving the Birch program?
So when I was struck by this this webinar series, this didn't exist as far as I knew when I was a Birch Scholar. So one thing that I think would be they do, they host the big meeting in the fall, but I think even offering more of these structured trans Birch programs, and even to the point of Monica's about the soft skills. So even some of these career development pieces, kind of bring them all, they can come up through the NIH, or people can feed into it where everyone can take advantage of it. I think our PIs are doing a lot of work for the Birch and leading it. And I think any help they can get kind of from the NIH and offering more opportunities to the scholars would be welcomed. So snagging what's done well somewhere else and making it available across the Birch programs, I think a little more integration that way would really strengthen the opportunities. And so it's not so dependent on the Birch PI to come up with every career opportunity piece for only their program. Would it be an improvement in the program?
Yeah, I really want to echo that, because what Ego and the Emory did to start this, for example, I'll give you an example. That there's this time management expert who I can give everyone her name, who once came out and talked to Birch about when I was a scholar, or helping with the Birch. Actually, at one point I was the program director of the Birch, and she was brilliant. Like, she just figured out. Her name is Susan Johnson from University of Iowa, and she had figured out. I don't know if you worked with her, Melissa, but she, had been an academician, long-term academician, and then she had it down is how we should be managing our time as academicians. She had tips about calendars and emails and how to manage email and what to turn off, and it was based on both corporate principles and business principles, but truly with an academic focus, because she's a long-term academician and now associate dean. And that is a shared resource, meaning she shouldn't go around to every Birch program in the country. This kind of system by which we use the one expert or a couple of experts in the country who are really good at giving that talk on the art of negotiation or time management, that because she stood out from the others, putting it on one place and then having all the Birch scholars watch it and ask her questions, I think is phenomenal opportunity, as opposed to lots of replicated seminars at different sites with people who may not be living and breathing what they're trying to teach.
And I would just put a plug in, this just comes down to nuts and bolts, but I'd put a plug in for thinking at the NIH level, if they are able to allow the Birch grant mechanism to be a 7-year mechanism, that programs don't have to go up every 5 years. I think it's so hard to get ready and get that application in. And boy, would that help, because they're doing such a fabulous job to do these programs, and giving them 7 years could be a great way to really reinforce the good stuff they're doing, so that when year 2 comes, or 2.5, they're already having to think about that next application going in. I think that'd be fabulous to give them a little bit more time, a 7-year approach.
That is a good idea.
Centers really actually, it's more common for a center grant to have 7 years for that same idea, to give them a little more time to really do the program, rather than in the 2nd year to have to already start thinking about writing.
Ego's coming forth like, yes.
yes, go for
it. Suddenly, like, he got very excited.
Lucky number 7, right? Well, we want to thank all the panelists for joining us today. Our time is wrapping up here. Thank you all for taking this time away from your day to help those that are on the Birch program to be benefited by your experience, by your knowledge, expertise. Once again, thank you to Dr. O and Brittany Copeland at Emory University for organizing this event, and